assistance program for creative placemaking. We've had a great day today so far with Tasha Golden and Jamie Horder earlier. And now we are going to have a great session with Escala LISC. I just want to remind everyone, if you haven't already, to change your name so that it shows your first name, your pronouns, and the location that you're from, and the project location that you're from. Just reminding you that the sessions will be recorded, but not necessarily our conversations. Encouraging folks to connect with each other and use the chat in all sessions. We've gotten some lively conversations going in the chat today, and that's been really encouraging, and we'll be collecting all that and saving it and pulling out the good things that you're sharing with each other next week when we send out the follow-up email. Just so you all know, the follow-up email next week will include all the session presentations, any handouts that some of the presenters have given out, some of the resources they've shared. And actually, Tasha asked me to tell you all that we'll be including a worksheet from her session that she didn't get to you this morning, but we'll be including that in next week's email as well. And there'll also be a survey. I'm encouraging you to really reach out to any of the resource team members that are joining us today to connect with them directly on your project. If you find that you want to connect with them later and you need to get in touch with them, you can just also reach out to me at lmccormick@lisc.org or use the rtown email address, rtownta@lisc.org. And if you haven't already, please register through the Eventbrite link that we sent out in some of the earlier invitations. It's also here in the chat if you haven't signed up, just so we can track who's been coming to the sessions. Also, just one last thing, we really, in these sessions, are trying to use the gallery view as much as possible when there isn't a presentation. And we really encourage you to turn on your cameras and participate in the conversation by unmuting yourself whenever you want to speak. So please do that so that we can all see each other and kind of at least try to pretend we're together in the same place. And with that final thought, I'm going to turn it over to Escala.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Escala LISC. I use the pronouns she, her. I am in Washington, D.C., and I am really excited to be here today. I think this is the part of the conference. It's like afternoon of day 2, so we kind of know each other, and we're gonna get ready for happy hour maybe, or you know, we've come in the room and decided to sit together. So just really glad that we're sharing space. And so my background is in housing and community development. I've worked, and really even beyond that, really comprehensive community development, and really just the intersection of arts, health, housing, how all of these important parts of our lives happen in place, and what that means for the lives we get to live. And so really glad, one of kind of the underlying pieces of that is and in terms of making change, is the role of community engagement. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I am going to share my screen really quickly, and we will get started. Okay, are we seeing my screen? Thumbs up, thank you, that's awesome. Okay, so our time today, it's really this chance to try to have a conversation about community engagement, which is probably one of the more fuzzy concepts that is part of the work that we do. And so maybe in kind of us coming together, having some discussion, looking at some tools, that there's some progress around gaining greater clarity. And that feels important because while fuzzy language works okay when you're with those that you're familiar with in your organization, in groups that you're a part of where you have shared experiences and kind of common points of reference, that that fuzzy language actually has real meaning. But as you work in partnership, as your work expands outside of the groups and people that you're familiar with, the fuzzy language can actually become a real obstacle to the work that you're trying to get done. And so that's part of the reason to try to unpack that a little bit. I have some assumptions. There's a ton of assumptions that are embedded in this session. One is that we are all engaged in a process of change, and that that's kind of an underlying piece here, and that the answers are in the room. So I am going to do my best to create the space, make connections, and I definitely don't have the answers, unfortunately, but I know that we together do. So that is some of the assumptions. So we'll go ahead and move forward and just start a little bit with the why. So when we're thinking about community engagement and why is it a part of our project? Why is it a part of the work that we do? I'm borrowing from a piece of work from that comes out of the kind of business world with this Simon Sinek. You might have seen, there's a TED Talk that says, start with the why. Often that feels pretty obvious, but a lot of times we end up starting with the what, like the things that we do, the parts of our project that are most visual, that are the kind of the products that that we engage with. They may be the block party, the public art installation, you know, the neighborhood plan. But really, when we're thinking about why the role of community engagement and how to set goals and gain clarity about what we're trying to accomplish, it becomes really important to actually start from at the very core of why. And a lot of times that's maybe things that are a little less tangible and maybe are have to do with values, have to do with aspirations, beliefs about why community engagement is important. So I thought as we start this conversation today, it would be great to hear from folks, why is community engagement important to the success of your project? And if folks want to jump in, or also feel free to chat. I'm just toggling to see if I can actually see. So, no brave volunteers this late in the afternoon. Matt, you're off mute, so I think you might talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I have a lot of answers to this question, depending on what we're talking about. And one of the things that's been maybe different about my project is that we're kind of embedded in supporting a much larger program. And so most of our community engagement has been piggybacking on panels of stakeholder groups that were already set up before we got there. And that's also meant that it's been a little difficult, especially in the COVID time, to go out of those boxes where it seems like something more robust or more, there's not a whole lot of actual neighborhood engagement, for example. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a challenge to get to. But I think that the why would be, our project is trying to provide an overlay of education and safety. And so understanding what education is needed, what types of users might need different types of education, and then also just how they perceive safety has been something that has been, that's come out as being really critical from the community engagement that we've done. And I think there's more needed in order to better understand it and address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I hear this important need around understanding that for you to be successful, that there's connection with key members of your community to understand what's needed. And your earlier point that there are maybe some constraints in your ability to really do that.
And we have like a separate thing is we have a need to build wider regional partnership. And so I see engagement in terms of understanding those regional partners' needs and interests in order to find our fuller vision and realize that is also, I think, going to be important.
Okay, so it's the building of a shared vision is part of that too. Maggie, it looks like you're trying to get in.
Yeah, just that, you know, I think almost by definition, the purpose of our projects is to impact our community and in some way. And, you know, certainly historically, all too often, that has been standing outside the community, looking in and pointing. And if we really want to be successful at impacting people, then we need to engage them in the process and enroll them in what we're doing, or it will, I mean, it will not be successful, but it also won't achieve anything for them. Nothing will happen to people who are not engaged.
Yeah, so those that you're raising this piece about, can true impact really happen if those who are meant to benefit aren't actually part of the work? So engagement to bring them in and as part of the solution. We have a couple of comments. I finally found the chat. I apologize because I was having a hard time finding it. So Megan, you are in Oxford, Mississippi, and you're talking all similarly that you can't exist or fulfill your mission without community engagement, without everyone in the county. And so you're kind of helping us understand the reach of who's important to your being able to deliver your work. And Yoko in Hinman, Kentucky, you've referenced that community engagement is necessary in the community where there's no education, no art education in the public school system. So that there's an absence of something to make change to maybe bring more art into the school system, that there has to be engagement. I'm going to encourage, and I should have said this at the beginning, as we go, we're going to spend a lot of time together in group. We're going to spend time in small groups, and we're going to do some individual reflection and encourage that actually as we go, there's that you're kind of building some of the reflections. And so I want to encourage that we take a minute right now with this question around why community engagement is important, and actually jot down that question. Why is community engagement important? The response to that question, that is, to the success of your project. And I'd encourage you that if you've already thought about your response, ask why again. And there's this practice that I'm sure is shared by a lot of us, that the 5 whys, that there's often we, even when we're thinking about the why, we're still sitting in maybe the what, the things that we're doing, or even some of the how. So the how that that artist-led practice is really important to achieving the why, or that youth are a critical component. So it's helpful to keep going with the why. So let's just take a minute, jot that down, hold it. We'll come back to it as we go. Okay. So we're building here. And so if we started with the why of our community engagement work, the next is a question of the who. So who is the community? What do we mean by community? Often it's the shared experiences by place and identity and other factors, you know, how in a place, you know, where we live, work, play, pray, learn, that that we have these experiences that connect us with others, that form and constitute community. It also has to do with identity, shared experiences by identity, probably a number of others. It's important when we're thinking about community engagement to really try to think as expansively about the who is the community today, and maybe you know, who is the aspiration in terms of who you're engaged with in community. And so I am curious to ask the question about not just who, but what are our ongoing ways of knowing who the community is. And I ask ongoing because the notions of community can often change. You know, they're not static places, or even, you know, with closed boundaries, regardless of where we're drawing the boundary. They're often dynamic, and that the members of community can be historic, current, future, even in thinking about the role that our idea of community has in terms of how we do our work, the goals that we set, the approaches that we take. So what are, and maybe if we open up again, would love to hear about what are your kind of who your community is, and how, and really more so about what are the ongoing ways of your knowing your community. What are some of the ways? Observation, I've offered some, you know, data, relationships. What are other ways? Maybe that's enough for now, if there's no one jumping in. What a second question that I'll ask is a question around who is in your community, who might be hidden or unseen. And so I ask this question because often when we start out in our community engagement, there are very clear constituents to the work that we're doing. There are those that are that we know are very visible and part of the kind of engage in our work. Maybe we already have existing relationships. There are parts of our community that are very clearly known through data or observation, but there may be parts of our community who might be hidden or unseen. And I'll give one quick example. I engaged in some with a group actually outside of the US in a different context, but a group working on a parks redevelopment. And it was a very involved community engagement process that that a group had been leading for over a year, and they were talking about kind of what that looked like and kind of the result of how the design of the park changed as a result of the different stakeholder groups that were engaged in the process. And they talked about how the lighting changed because the homeless population that uses the park was uncomfortable in the dark, like for safety for homeless who were key members of the community, that that they made the changes. And it occurred to me in that this was like, you know, the learning that maybe is obvious, but was that that is not a a constituent or a member of community that I often have heard as having influence on the outcomes of projects, of kind of public space projects. And so I'm curious, and Lynn has dropped the question in the chat, who is in your community that is hidden or unseen, or maybe about experiences or ways in which you have learned or discovered new members of your community that has been important to the work that you're doing? I have a design for today that's very interactive. I'm worried it might not work. And we can keep going. Youth and elders are often unseen, unheard in your community.
I'll speak up.
Thank you. Yeah.
Our project is an urban arts farm that we're in the process of planning right now. It's just an urban farm that's about 4 acres that's located on a former golf course. And we're trying the rate of poverty is high, the rate of crime is high. And we're trying to create not only a safe place where we can address issues of food security, but also a place where people can get out. So if we have art and culture engagements at the site, in addition to the farm, we think it'll be, you know, a good place for a family to go out. But what could draw them out, not as a group, but also, you know, offer something individually to what might be multi-generational. So we've tried to address that programmatically. So for teenagers or I should say middle school and high school, we have a program for them that's after school and weekends. But we also created a program that includes elementary school children and older people at the same time. And that's our Harmony Gardens, thinking that that would not only have maybe some childcare angle to it, but also some purpose for the older folks to be rejuvenated by the youth and those types of things. And then also cooking demonstration classes and those types of things, not to be just, you know, hyper all-inclusive, but the more members of the family that we can get, we really want it to become a family destination, but with individual appeal, if that makes sense. It might be kind of common sense, but.
No, that's great. So you've been able to really think about all the different parts, you know, the different parts of the family that you can customize your programming to try to engage their involvement in your project.
Well, and maybe tippy toe into the family to bring them on. So it might start out that the parents are doing a drop off or a walkover for the little one, but then eventually they'll start to come to appreciate it as a place for themselves too. So sort of broadening the marketing appeal too.
Absolutely. So there's some to the kind of, and in thinking about families as your community, there's some work that you've done to understand what appeals and to reflect that in what you're doing, so that there is that involvement. That's great. Matt, you're pointing out you had important findings in talking to Refugee Service Committee. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, it's been a refugee services organization provided some of the initial support for our project, like writing a letter of support for the grant. And they've been very helpful, but it also has been, you know, one thing that's come up is that there are within the refugee communities, especially around 1 or 2 of our sites, there's such a huge number of different ethnicities and backgrounds that number one, a lot of the perspectives or use potentials are really wide. But then there also has just been one thing that's become quite apparent is that very few of the people in those communities know how to swim. And we're, you know, on a river. So it has, the one thing that has been really useful is that there is kind of this for the larger project, a distant view of needing to add programming that adds swimming education. And that has been highlighted quite greatly through some of this work. But another thing is, and kind of going back to the original thing that I said earlier, that the perceptions of safety are very different for different people next to rivers. Mm-hmm. And I think each of those groups are certainly informing that idea.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Just as a corollary, I think in my work in Latinx communities in Philadelphia, there's a lot of hidden heterogeneity. So recently arrived folks are really different than folks who have been in Philly for 10 or 20 or 15 years. Folks who are from different Central American countries are really different from folks who are from Mexico. Younger immigrants who came here as children are really different as folks who migrated as adults, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of difference and heterogeneity within communities that you kind of assume that you know.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So I want us to kind of, oh, go ahead, Maggie.
No, I was going to say in our city, there is a significant population of previously incarcerated, and particularly young men of color. And when people then go and wonder about why the young men don't participate, they don't take into account the fact that they schedule things at 6 p.m. when they are not allowed to be on the streets. Because their parole parameters make it impossible for them to actually participate in things that get set up by people who want to help.
Mm-hmm. So there are barriers in not maybe kind of disaggregating or really being clear about the different the profile of your community and the different characteristics or needs or constraints that the unintended consequence of that is that actually creating obstacles to the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
that's great, or not great, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So I want us to keep building on this. And so the next thing I want to introduce is this spectrum of community engagement. This is kind of adapted from a number of different places, but is kind of a something that is comes from the international group around public participation. And I'm wondering if folks have seen this before or used this currently. No, awesome. That's going to be fun. So this is some of the this is some of getting at the, can we get a little more clear about what we mean by community engagement and clear in terms of really thinking about the goals of what it is that the community engagement is offering to the work that you're doing, the why that we started with. So how community engagement is a way of helping to achieve your goals. And so I'm going to just walk through it, and then we'll kind of come back and have more discussion. So this is, you can think of this as a spectrum. That there are, you can exist in different parts of your kind of, you have different strategies that exist in different parts of the spectrum. But I'll start on the far with actually one that is almost off the spectrum, right? Like, so it's starting at 0, and it's this notion of ignore. And so this is where, that explicit or implicit, that the goals end up being and kind of denying access to the process. And that what this frame offers is that our goals, the activities that we do, they send messages. They communicate a promise to the community. And so in this case, what's being communicated is your voice or your needs or interests do not matter. And often the activities that communicate that are when there are closed door meetings, when there's misinformation, and often it's systematic by either really intentionally or unintentionally excluding certain populations or whole populations. And so the conversation we just had about really being kind of breaking down and being really clear about the who really shows up here, in that you can hold an intent that is, you would never have a goal of denying access. And yet by not being clear, it's very possible that that's what's happening in your community engagement. So I'll move on. The next is inform, and inform is probably, I'd say, one of the most foundational pieces, because it's really about information and really about being able to provide the community with relevant information. And any community engagement work probably starts here, because it's how effective are you at reaching different audiences to be able to communicate the change that is happening, the change that you are helping to facilitate. Building on that, kind of expanding beyond just a kind of one-way flow of information, there's consult. So consult is you're really gathering input from the community. Your message is, we want to know what you think, what ideas do you have? And you might use activities like surveys or focus groups or public comment periods that might help you listen for what the community has to share, and the ideas and input into your project and your work. Moving from there to involve, the difference between consult and involve has to do a lot with the mechanisms for using what it is you learn from the community. So consult doesn't necessarily imply or hold that you are going to directly apply what it is that you learn. And that may be appropriate. It may be that the stage of your project is fairly well established, and in terms of what it is that you're doing. And by consulting, you can make some you can make some adjustments, but you're really not really changing the course of your work. Whereas involve, you might engage in a process of community engagement with the intention that what you create is going to be the direct response of what the community is articulating. And so in involve, your goals have to do with making sure that you're meeting the needs and responding to the assets in the community. And your message is that, yeah, you're making us think. You're making us think differently. And as a result, we're going to actually make changes. We might actually change our timeline. We might actually change the way that we are working and our goals of the project because of what it is that you've shared with us. And some of the tactics that might involve have to do with, again, it could be a process of interactive workshops, visioning workshops, community forums. Something you might notice is that the activities might show up along the spectrum in multiple places. And it starts to become a question of what it is you do with the information and what role it is that the community has in your project that makes the difference as we move along. And as we continue moving across the spectrum, collaborate. So collaborate is really saying, let's work together. So this is where you might actually establish more formal roles for members of the community in your project. This might be advisory committees or governing boards. There, you might form an MOU with groups that are representative of different parts of your constituency, and here it really is this kind of working together. So that it's a much more formal, much more active role. And then the kind of the furthest end of the spectrum has to do with really working together, but even more than working together, really following the lead of the community. And so this is really where we start to see that there's this shared leadership, that there is actually maybe delegating decisions, that there may be parts of your project that say, you know, the best people positioned to decide this aspect of the project is actually the community, and we're going to implement what they tell us, that's our function. So the kind of point of all of this is that there really is that we could have that by being intentional about the role that you want the community to have in your project or even aspects of your project can help you to be more aware and explicit about the messages and the impact that your activities and approach is having on your community engagement efforts. So I'll pause there and see if there are any reactions or questions. Okay.
You know, maybe this feels like a kind of an obvious question, but it seems so clear that the things on the far right side of the spectrum are superior in every way. Why are they so hard?
So,
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. This is where the answers are in the room for sure. You know, one thing I will respond to actually is that they do get you different things, right? They do, like, each of the kind of pieces along the spectrum. And if we kind of take out the ignore, which actually may do kind of more harm, but each of the pieces are actually very important to, and so there may be parts of the, so I just say that to say that it's not, the point is not everything has to be defer and to or empower, because either that may not be appropriate or feasible. There may be constraints where that's not feasible. But there are ways to actually think about that they are in, you know, there's value in each of the pieces, and also that you can think of these as stages of development also. There are maybe some conditions that underlie being able to reach and get to the defer, and actually that is a transition to our next slide so that that kind of gets to some of that. Because there was handy animation, but it didn't work on this, so you're getting it all at once. But so along the top here, you know, so thinking about like what's the movement in the spectrum, one thing that's happening is that each of these stages reflects a different role around decision making that you expect the community to have. And so that's kind of moves along. And that's maybe a kind of more visual, more, you know, more tangible way in which there's the difference between the boxes. But underlying that are some of the things that are a little less tangible or a little harder to see and hold. And that has to do with relationships, the relationships with community, the relationships within community, within your organization, within different parts of I want to say community again, within different parts of maybe the ecosystem that that can really help, that can really, you know, that are the dimensions of trust and the dimensions of willingness to kind of engage and participate, that are really kind of rests a lot of times in relationships, and also those that don't, where there's been broken trust, or where there has been, you know, repeated or historic experiences that kind of fracture or the absence of relationships. Another piece is capacity. And so this is really, you know, this question of what capacity is involved and required to of all parties, of those doing the engaging and those who are being engaged, to be able to collaborate, to be able to apply, translate vision into practice and strategy, to be able to navigate and engage with different stakeholders and structures and rules within the work. And so that's kind of another implicit piece that feels like a condition that that requires attention to be able to operate in different ways along the spectrum. And then finally, power. So power being, at its most basic, is the ability to do things, to get things done, and that their power is held in a lot of different ways, whether it be formally in terms of positions of authority, or informally in terms of aspects of identity, or possession of capital or resources, and so the being able to, I think, be successful along the different pieces of the continuum asks that we are explicit in our attention to all of these dynamics. And that's where it gets really hard, I think, in a long way to come back to your question. How is this sitting with folks? Does this resonate in the work that you're doing? Is it helpful? Maggie? Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Maggie.
One of the things that I'm struck by is how much sort of a willingness to be really honest in terms of the relationships plays into this, because sort of tokenism, what we sort of winds up thinking about as tokenism, really occurs when people in the community believe that they're at the position called power, where they're defer or empower, but they in fact don't have the actual capacity or authority to act. So there they are, believing that that they're being heard, that the leadership is being shared, and the final decision making. But the final decision making is not actually being made with them. Mm-hmm. They may or may not have even been in the room when the actual decision got made.
Absolutely. And I think you're pointing to kind of the maybe the case for transparency in community engagement efforts about what it is that actually folks are being engaged around, and whether it is that because I think very often, and for very good motivations, there is kind of engagement and outreach to have community voice and really a value around the role that community plays. But again, often there are constraints or there are limitations that mean that the way in reality that the work is going to play out is not going to involve their decision making. And so there are two courses, right? There's one course is or there are multiple courses, but there's work to figure out how to open up more places for decision making, and there's work to be transparent, because what are the unintended consequences? That the tokenization, like what the way in which that may ultimately undermine the work in the short term and definitely in the long term.
Yeah, I think one of the things that happens is what I can't remember which session it was, but in an earlier session, the question was asked, why don't they come? You know, why don't people come and participate in what we've set up? And I think that people not actually being part of the decision-making process is part of what leads to that. And then particularly if they've been led to believe that their input mattered, and then now we're at the end and they don't see it anywhere, then they not only will not show up for this one, but they won't show up for the next thing you do either.
Absolutely. Or to your earlier point, that maybe by virtue of when you schedule the meeting, you've communicated that I'm pointing with my finger. You've communicated the ignore. You know, you've communicated that it's in effect a closed door meeting, even though that is not the design or the intent. Yeah. Other thoughts, Matt, Megan? Others want to jump in?
I'll jump in real quick, just from a rural perspective, looking at the spectrum of engagement. I think Maggie's point is really to be noted in that I think, I don't want to overgeneralize, but even in small communities, there could be the perception of doing these steps when in fact the closed door meeting, the decision's already been made. So, and in some ways, this can be used as a political tool to intentionally disenfranchise. And so I think being aware of the structure and just having it laid out this way is good from a strategic point, and just knowing how to approach, if you really want to be participating, know where some of the potholes are so far in the road, and know where some of the obstacles are, and having it laid out this way, especially on the spectrum from 0 to 5, I think is helpful in identifying maybe where some of those obstacles exist. And I know this is true in smaller rural communities where you can have a really tight network of decisions being made with no community input. And so being aware of what the structure is, I think, is a really, really critical first step to systematic change. If you're going to change, especially the closed door loop, to a more engaging process, especially with, I think this is really important following Jamie's presentation of those just amazing, strategies for community engagement. But having this out, I think it's a good parallel. So I just wanted to thank Maggie for that comment.
That's great. Yeah, one of the there's a PDF that we'll share with you, and there's a link to some of the sources of this, and one of them is a toolkit, and it offers some kind of tips on having these conversations in your community. And one of the things it offers potentially is actually a chance to have some conversations about this area under the table, the relationships, capacity, power, the context that is influencing the way that the work is happening and the experience of those participating or not participating. And so that's great. It's something to consider. Okay, Megan. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, for us, we had to reassess sometimes, not with the project for our town, but with some of our other programming. We would offer free programming. We would even offer like food and other things, but it's okay for people not to be interested in what you're, hold on just a second. We're on spring break here, and it's somebody's birthday, and it's really crazy. But just that it's okay for people. Sometimes they're just not going to be interested And then we take those same programs though and work through this, which is not to say that I may have presented it now like I'm not interested in what people think, and we are. So if someone isn't interested in an arts program, even though it's free and there's food, then we go back and reassess and get the community involved. And it's just also accepting that sometimes people, like in Oxford, we're all about, there's a lot of people that are into the university sporting teams, so they spend their money there, you know. But our projects, I love this because I feel like I can reassess. You can use it to move forward to the right and then reassess again, because I feel like you're always going to miss somebody. I mean, we're just imperfect people working through stuff. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, because we're learning, right? Like as we go, like there's like discovery constantly. And so it does give new meaning, new light. And this piece about the interest too, I would also refer back to the why, because it may be that they aren't interested in the art program, but your why, and maybe like your third or fourth why that underlies what's behind it, is absolutely aligned. And so that's another way to think about then where the point of engagement is with those that maybe have seemed not interested, though there might be something there. Yeah. Okay. So to the point of assessment, I want to take see if this works. Just take about 5 minutes here to plot where you are. So do a quick, like, where do you think your work is today? Think about, and actually I'm going to ask Gally, if you could go ahead and share the PDF that has the table built out. But so think about your work today, put yourself on the spectrum, give yourself a number. Think about the why that you started with. Does it match? So are your goals based on what it is that you're doing? Do they actually match where you are? And if think about different segments. Is it the same? So to the point of like, you might change where you might sit in one place for one group, another for another, and what that means. And is this where you want to be? So if not, maybe note where it is that you want to be. This is where there are a lot of questions here. So pick the pieces. And then, once you've done that about where you are, where you want to be, think about this question about relationships, capacity, power dynamics, and just jot down a few that you think are helping or maybe limit progress towards your goals. How are folks doing? Take another minute. If you're good to go, you could give me a thumbs up. This is when I'd like say table tents up when we're in the room or something. Okay. All right, so just to start, you could write a thesis with all the questions I gave you. So it's just a way to kind of get some thinking. And we're actually going to now move into small group discussions to really do more processing. And so, the whole idea, like with the small group, is it is a chance to actually to get perspective, workshop your ideas. We're going to take 15 minutes in the discussion. What we're ask that you take a minute. They're small. I think we'll have 3 people. So introduce yourselves, your name, where you're working, and encourage you to have a discussion about your reflections from the assessment that you just did. So what did you find in doing your assessment? And then some discussion about what will it take to meet your current or future goals. So it's a really awesome opportunity to check in and get some feedback, to listen to maybe in someone else's questions or struggles that there's learning or something you might offer, or vice versa. So 15 minutes, and we'll kind of give you some cues. The worksheet that is in the chat, the Google Doc. Thank you, Galli. Those are kind of the steps. I do encourage, if someone wants to just step into facilitator, that's always helpful. So encourage someone to step in and take up that role. And then there's a Google Doc that has the same questions and also has the spectrum, so you can reference that since you won't see the screen. Any questions before we go? We break down. Okay, so I'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Thank you.
I think we only have like 4 actual grantees left.
I know. I actually was going to chat to you to see if we should even break down.
Well, I think it's still good that they get to talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's just like I should have told, I didn't realize till just now, like when it's too late, I should have told Galli just to pair the 2 groups. I'm sure she did it anyway. She knows. She probably put Galli, did you put like the two grantees and then 2 resource team members in a group or something? I don't know.
I have 3 groups of 3. They each should have, 2 of them have a staff member and 2 grantees, and then one of them is Jamie, Margie, and Matt Greener.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Margie didn't have the asterisk, so I totally missed that. Sorry.
That's okay.
Oh, asterisk is got it.
I don't know, maybe Escal, if you want to jump into the rooms and see and suggest to come back all together. I don't know. It's up to you.
I think it's fine to leave them. Matt, if Matt's in with Jamie and Margie, it's fine because he's on a whole other. They'll have a good conversation, the 3 of them. It'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one other group where there's only one other grantee though.
So I have a room with John Davis, Megan, and Yoko. And then Catherine is with Leah and Maggie.
Okay.
Is that okay? Just cut off somebody or several people in mid-sentence, so apologies for that. But that's a good sign that you were having probably really good conversations. We have a little bit of time now just to kind of bring it back together. So in the conversations you were just having, any new reflections or insights that you would offer to the group in the conversation we've been having around community engagement? New insights, reflections, new questions even that have come up that would be helpful to our overall conversation.
So right as we were concluding, the part of what I was sharing was that within my project, there are power structures that have caused some kind of different ways of limiting both access to grassroots community development, but also larger, more politically motivated partnerships. And Jamie was sharing right at the end that perhaps using the continuum with some alterations to facilitate a discussion with some of our project leaders and stakeholders may help bring everybody a little bit more together so that we can do more of the work that we'd like to be doing.
Mm-hmm. That's terrific. Absolutely. Having a way to make visible what maybe is dictates how things are happening, but maybe isn't fully visible is really helpful. And maybe, something to think about in that is going into conversations like that. What's just some of the organizing you might do in advance? So, who are who's aligned with you and who maybe sees it, and you can have that clear conversation. So you start to even build the conversation before you even enter the room. That's great. Other insights? Maggie, yeah? Oh, you're on mute. Got it.
We had a pretty raw, vulnerable kind of conversation about sort of what happens in that process with the people that don't normally wind up in that room at all, particularly those who, for whatever reason, have been assessed to not know, not be informed, not, for whatever reason, not really be considered in terms of what they bring to the party, that they are the people that we are serving, and as opposed to those who we believe we can collaborate and, but we tend to not see those people that don't wind up in the room as having something to contribute, and how important it is to actually see them in their fullness, in the fullness of who they are as human beings, and therefore be willing to hear things that we might not have otherwise heard, so that they actually, for all of the things that they have been denied and have been left out, have some things to offer that that we can't really access any other way. And that's a huge, real contribution to the process and to ultimately to the effectiveness and success of the kind of projects that we're talking about when we're talking about community engagement.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I applaud you on having a vulnerable conversation, because that's not easy. And I think when I hear that, I think about just in the frame of just what we've been talking about here with this notion of capacity, and thinking about it in terms of the capacity to do the engagement. Like, what does that mean to actually have the capacity to really examine mental models that we might hold that show up in the way that we're interacting with others? What are forms of listening? What's the skill around listening that actually is really critical to being able to shift the way that the work happens. So thank you. That's great. Other thoughts or other reactions even to what you're hearing now? Okay. Megan, yeah?
Okay. So I just really appreciate you offering this, because it makes me think about how I can improve. And I'm very shy and I'm always afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing. But I just wanted to say something so there wasn't silence, and just to say thank you.
Thank you. That was vulnerable too. So thank you. And I before we got on, I was talking about how uncomfortable I get in silence. And so I appreciate that too. Good. Well, we don't have to, so I think that there are a few resources that I mentioned before that are in that document. There's definitely, I think my email is in that as well. If there's other questions, if you want to kind of continue the conversation, and really appreciate all of the, all that's gone into this, and yeah, so thank you. And thanks for your time. And I think Lynn, you'll wrap us up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just thank you, Escala. Thank you for a wonderful session. And thanks to all of you who are here with us at the very end of the day. Welcome, Rebecca. I know you just got here. Well, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow a little bit more. Matt, Megan, Maggie, and Yoko, you get the award for sticking it out for the whole day today. So thank you for being here. We hope that this day's been wonderful with all the sessions. Just really grateful to the resource team members, Jamie, who's still with us, and Escala and Tasha, and John, thank you for being with us, and Leah. We're just hope that this has been helpful, and that you'll come back tomorrow and join us. And we're here for you. If you need anything, just reach out. And for those of you who are grantees, please, please, please be in touch and reach out to us to get in touch with the resource team members or me. We're just really, really interested in helping and learning more about your projects. And on behalf of the National Endowment for the Arts, I don't know, Catherine, do you want to have any final words here?
No, I just, like Matt said, I feel like I learned so much today. It was just this great day. Lots of, I think, actionable, practicable, that's a word, tools. And so, yeah, we're going to be working to harvest all of these and turn them back to you, kind of digest them and turn them back to you in an organized way. So don't be too stressed if you had to double task during some of this.
Yeah, we'll be sending everything out to everyone next week, all the materials, all the resources, as much of what we can capture from the chat as possible in terms of resources. So don't feel like you have to make sure you lost something, but yeah.
We'll hope we see you all back tomorrow. Thank you so much for all your active insights and thoughts and sharing today. It's been great.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, and thank you to Gally and Jasmine, our techs, and Brooke, our closed captioner. Thank you guys so much, and Margie Waller.
Thank you, Escala. Thank you. That was awesome.
Hey. It's fun.
We had such a, I was in Maggie's group, we had such a neat, just really, she like pointed at, I guess the core assumption of that spectrum, which is that there is a level of capacity to show up.
Mm-hmm.
But real, like, also, like, it was just a great interaction conversation. And like, gosh, like, I think just there's some really interesting work looking forward and like to keep an eye, almost if I were like a PhD student, like we have a kind of an emerging practice around what does it mean to do this work in a trauma-informed way.
Oh, yeah.
And now we've all been through this trauma of like this isolation and people being sick and, you know, how like, and what does that mean for us in like in the arts and culture sector and field, and what are the implications for that spectrum? I got thinking about it because I was thinking, I don't know that spectrum as well as I know the Sherry Arnstein ladder of participation from, you know, and in that one, there's a rung called like therapy, which is, I love that one. I think that one's a real red flag for us in the arts because we kind of invite a certain kind of, oh, does Gally